Thank you, Cleona, and thank you to all 6 members of our panel. This panel has focused on users' needs, and I think there we are looking at what Donald Rumsfeld would have called a known unknown. We know that those needs exist, but we're not yet fully clear what they are, and that, it seems to me, applies both to the users, the potential buyers in the climate market, and also from the point of view of the service providers. I perhaps have a few questions of my own for the panel, but let me first see how many questions we may have from the floor. Could I see a show of hands for possible questions? All questions have been answered by the panel debate. Amazing. 2, good, good. Okay. I will start with the gentleman over here.
Thank you very much indeed. Yanis Folkmanis, DG Energy at the European Commission. Firstly, my congratulations really to the effort of constructing the roadmap, our colleagues at DG RTD and also the team. It really is a major effort and we believe of major importance for the energy sector, as demonstrated, I think, by the presentation from Enel. My questions are basically 2, one on mitigation, and it would be mainly to Monica Baer and I think to Carlo Ferrara, on mitigation, and the second one on timescales. It seems logical if looking at, for the energy sector at the moment, for the Juncker plan, we are saying we will need to fulfill 40% reductions by 2030 and other energy policy goals, 20 billion annually of new additional energy investments. That's absolutely a massive task. It's mainly a mitigation task. So when you look at an investment in energy, power station, pipeline, interconnector, wind farm, it's a 50-year investment. Whereas Paul Simpson was actually saying for 5 years timescales for his investors. So could you please, especially the first 3 speakers, comment on the timescale and the inclusion of mitigation, because for the energy sector, certainly, mitigation seems to be almost necessarily included in the data needed for the engineering and the investment task.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm going to add my question immediately because it was on a similar theme. Members of the panel have talked about the assessments of risks that they have so far done and a recognition that that's a first learning by doing exercise. How far have you looked ahead, and when do you expect to need to redo those assessments? Partly in terms of looking beyond your current horizon, and perhaps also partly in terms of changing risk circumstances. So, a similar question, please. Carlo.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree. Actually, it's interesting to say that right now, in this moment, the CEO of Enel is meeting the president of a big NGO environmental group. Historically speaking, has been an opponent to our policy. And today, finally, 2 days before the presentation to the analysts of our plan, there is a meeting because it will be recognized the efforts that we have been doing and we will do in our plan. This is just to say that I totally agree, and this is interesting, that the major components of our next industrial plan are actually, main of them can be considered as sustainable and part of a huge mitigation plan. More precisely, I'm speaking in terms of investment for renewable, investment for the demand on energy efficiency. That will be definitely one of the relevant part of our business in the next years. Regarding the scale, we were used to have a 10 years industrial plan. Now we moved to 5 years because energy sector is, you know better than me definitely, is changing so much that we realize that certain evaluation cannot be done in terms of markets, but definitely in terms of business development, we are, as I mentioned, we are internalizing in our evaluation certain water stress analysis up to 2035. And regarding last question, when we will redo the efforts of a scenario, I don't know, but has been really relevant one. so involved all the company.
I'm probably the next one. So we had, as many other companies, also a lot of experience in extreme weather events. For example, we have sites in the US, so in the hurricane zone. So we had experience with Katrina, and we had floodings in Tarragona. We had low and high water Rhine in that very famous year, 2003. So we had there also experience, and with flooding in Indonesia. So so for mitigation or risk minimization, so our plants, for example, in the US after Katrina, were ready to start operation again. But there was no sufficient infrastructure, and it is a problem that we have also seen in Tarragona and also in Indonesia. So companies cannot mitigate for climate adaptation without the infrastructure. Because for example, in Tarragona we had flooding, and that was because the foreseen basin to go down to the sea was not clear to manage all the water that was coming during an enormous thunderstorm. So I think for the future it is very important to couple adaptation measures of companies with adaptation measures of infrastructure. That was our experience, also in Indonesia. For the time scale, so chemical plants that are now planned for a certain time horizon usually operate between 30 to 40 years. So the time now gets into the direction of 2050. And 2050 is the year where the climate change weather events will increase. That is what we know from the forecast from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we have time for about 30 years to adapt. But for the planning cycle, I think it's already 2040 and 50. So, and as you also, we look very carefully to water stress areas for our future plannings.
Just something about investment horizons. I mean, obviously, 20 billion euros is a big investment, but I better get my facts right because Jesse works for the IEA. I think the IEA says that we need $30 trillion of investment in energy systems over the next 30 years globally. So actually, the EU needs out of that 30 trillion are not huge. Obviously, many emerging economies need far greater investment. So the money is there. It has to be an attractive proposition, and that requires the right regulation, the right infrastructure, the right information. So there's no shortage of capital in the world. Just a point on timescales, because you raised it. The point I'm really making is that most humans acting in business and investors really struggle to think beyond 5 years. It's not that they won't make investments for the longer term, and I think that the growth in climate bonds and green bonds is a great opportunity for the EU energy sector. So, but it's predicted by the end of this year, climate change bonds, that is specific investment funds for debt financing of infrastructure and other projects that have climate benefits, will reach around $1 trillion. And the Climate Bonds Initiative doing a lot of work on this. That started really with development banks, World Bank, European Investment Bank, but it's really being picked up by the private sector now. So the private sector investment firms have a will to invest more money in sustainable infrastructure. And I think there's the huge opportunity for the EU energy sector.
Thank you. Any other members of this panel on that question? In that case, may I take the question that was over there at the back, and then the lady?
Thank you very much. My name is André Jol. I work at the European Environment Agency in Copenhagen, Denmark. And we manage the Climate Adapt platform, which was mentioned very briefly this morning. We actually published a report last year on how many countries currently have an adaptation strategy in place or an action plan. It turns out of our 33 countries, it's 21 who have a strategy currently in place, so which is very promising, but this is also still somewhere to go that all of them have a strategy. What I also like to mention is that many countries are now developing a kind of national adaptation platform or information system. We will bring out a report on that very soon. We will publish that in May. My question now to the panel is, how much are you aware, how much are you actually considering the national adaptation strategies in your countries, or the action plans in some cases, and how much do you actually collaborate with governments? How do you see this collaborative process? This could be to the stakeholders from the industry or maybe others as well. Thank you.
Good question.
I can try. So for Germany, I know them quite well. So I know the national adaptation plan. We have a lot of regional projects in Klimmzug with special regions in Germany. So we are quite well informed, and that was really, we have there so many results that were very useful for us for our planning of adaptation. That were the regional results of that adaptation in Germany with these local projects.
Honestly, I don't know so much about strict. I mean, we are in touch with the Ministry and of Environment, and we definitely agree with them regarding the. We are going to phase out around 11 gigawatt of traditional capacity in Italy, and this has been definitely something that has been communicated and communicated with the Ministry. In terms of adaptation, I think that I don't have a proper Italian perimeter view, I have to say. I'm sorry about it. I know that the grid, the infrastructure and network department is collaborating a lot, but I think much more at local level, not at national level. I'm sorry for that.
May I add? Yes, actually, Carlo is right, because Italy hasn't approved yet the strategy, even if the strategy is ready since 2 years. So it's just a formal but very important passage that is missing. So actually, what we did was to consider in our work the national strategy and to align as much as possible our work with the national strategy that were being implemented at that time. And hope that it will be approved soon, actually, as well as we do hope that even regional strategies will be approved so that there will be a full governance awareness in the country.
Okay, may we move to the question over here?
I'm Kirsten Halsnæs from the Danish Technical University. I was very inspired by this narrative by Kurt Vanderberg about these doctors. The medical doctors are the climate service professionals. But when I heard this, the cases from the BASF, I see that these doctors are more like a very sophisticated surgeon in the hospital, able to make heart transplantations or something like that. And what we really need is maybe some of these physicians, the family doctor, who are able to speak to the audience and to communicate and meet the demand. So I think the point is that we need a business model where these family doctors are able to get in contact with the customers and the companies. And with these climate fact sheets, I think what I think is that we need to do it in practice and have to learn, because it's not very helpful that we are just giving a lot of information that is not scientifically based. And I've seen maps like the one from the Climate Service Center from Germany many times before. And we know actually that the information you need in the companies and in the municipalities do not really exist. So we have to get the different ends to meet and to communicate. And I would also be a bit afraid if we are just saying that we know this and that in a way where big companies or SMEs are just investing on something which is really nothing, just very easy sort of information. So I think we should discuss the business model. How do we get a high professional information? How do we link the specialists, the doctors, family doctors to the demand side and really get this to move in a efficient way? And we should try with some cases where we can show that it works in practice.
I hope very much that is going to be the task of the next panel. However, if any members of this panel have any comments on that, very welcome. Please, if you want to.
Thank you for this comment question. I wholeheartely agree with you. I'm going to throw another profession in the mix. As an ex-biologist, I like to think of people like myself, intermediary organizations, as field workers, people in the field doing the work. Doing the work with us, with companies, getting them to change, to take on climate services is not easy. Maybe why it's not so much talked about and a clear business model is not available. It's not easy. It's often like banging your head against a wall. Environment has gone down the priority list significantly in the last few years compared to even 15, 20 years ago when there was a boom in environmental services. So I agree with you. I think it's not easy, and I also hope that we can address this issue in the afternoon session.
Another question over here.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's also very important to go on the metaphor that we used, that let's say diagnosis is not only made in Brussels, but also not only in the national capitals, and then also in the regional capitals, and that it's not only done, but it's also shared. So that, let's say I consider myself as a company doctor, so to prepare adaptation for my company, but I'd like to make sure that my practice and the advice I give is shared with my colleagues in other companies, so I'm sure that I don't miss any state-of-the-art knowledge. And that would be great if what's happening today, that means a panel of different users sharing on climate services, would also happen, and with a strong political will of member states to take on this share of knowledge. This is something that it's better addressed together with users, but also with public, as you mentioned, with infrastructure examples that affects your company. Thank you very much.
Could I take Eivind and then the lady in the orange cardigan? Take several questions at once.
Thank you. Eivind Hoff-Elimari from the Research Council of Norway. I wanted to build on the question from the Danish Technical University. And I wanted to ask Monica Baer for a comment. Because if you take this doctor analogy, the doctor, or rather the patient, feels relatively quickly how the advice, how the counsel is working or not. And you gave the example of this prototype in Ludwigshafen. And given that we assume we talk about predictions for the long term, when you decide whether you want to do this rather complicated exercise, spending lots of time and money for doing this in all your different sites around the world, you presumably would like to know something about, empirically, did the diagnosis fit with the reality? So, unless we talk about very, 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 very long-term perspectives for growing this market, how do you see the feedback between diagnosis, outcomes, and that whole feedback cycle? Thank you.
Okay, I will try. So, nevertheless, I have to say, maybe I have studied medicine before because I was for 10 years in Institute of Meteorological and Climate Research in Karlsruhe, so I have a feedback. And then I was for 20 years now in BASF, so maybe it is necessary to get really one of these engaged end users that try to translate the information for the end users in the companies and the sites. So nevertheless, you need some knowledge, and you need to know what models can do and where the uncertainties are. And nevertheless, never give up and try to get the information, to start new projects, and to go to the target, to the end target, to get finally the information. Okay, for our time scale, once again, it is important. You have to be convinced, and I followed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report since 1994. So that was a lot of experience, and then you sometimes, or one time, you trust when that signal was coming out of the noise. So, and that is a very long experience. And then you are looking for partners. And what is, I think, very important is to go really to meetings, to international conferences, and to get the information. For example, we always try to go to these meetings. We have also been at the first European Conference for Adaptation to Climate Change in Hamburg. And there we have got a lot of information. And I think that is a long-term process, and to find the right partners, and to be willing to learn together with the climate modelers.
I just would like to add one quick thing. In the roadmap is well stated how the relationship between academia and policymaker is well structured, but is missing sometimes the link with the business community. And there are two activities that are two main actions that are very well stated in the roadmap: demonstrating the impacts and full value of climate services as standalone services, some pilot for free so that you can let the top decision maker in private sector that this could be an add value for the company, as well as definitely the need of standards and protocols in order to have robust and agreed among the scientific community set of data that can be used. Because otherwise, if there is uncertainty on the scientific side, you can imagine how reluctant will be the business side to take decision on some figures that are not even agreed on the scientific side. Those are 2 points that, in my point of view, are.
I think those were crucial points. Please, the lady in orange.
Hi, my name's Molly Anderson. I'm from the Environment Agency in England. We're both a user of climate services and one of the purveyors of climate services to other companies and public sector organisations. The question I have is for Paul and Cleona. What is your view of how far public providers of climate services should go, and when should we stop and commercial providers take over?
I can have a go. I mean, I think, if you look at climate services at the moment, most of the knowledge has come from the public providers. In fact, before I bought my house, I used your website to work out the flood risks for my house. It's true. I mean, Kurt, you talked about this morning, but you have a brilliant tool on your website. So I think, in a sense, the public entities have done a great job at garnering and building a real strong knowledge pool. I think part of the weakness is sometimes they're not always the best at translating that into the user's needs. So that's really the question: is do you want to build that capacity in your own right, or do you want to partner to work with others? I've done a lot of work with PwC over the years. About 10 years ago, they probably had about 50 people in sustainability. Now they've got 600. Is that a good route to market for you? And can you monetize, I sound very businesslike, some of your assets, your research, to build greater public good by working better with others? And I think probably the answer is yes. So I don't think there's from a public good perspective, a boundary. It's just, will you and we be more successful by sometimes partnering with others who have greater business knowledge? I think the answer to that is yes.
Good question. Is this on? Yes. Good question. Interesting question. There's some things I say ditto with Paul. I think the role of public providers are certainly about providing accurate information, reliable information, key terminology used in the roadmap. I also feel there's a lot of room for effective engagement of the end users. We have the ability to engage a large amount of them at the same time, which private sector cannot always do, and creating dialogue. So it's not just about servicing them, but finding out firsthand their demand, so we can better provide that feedback into the whole process. When should the private sector take over? I definitely think when you're dealing with individual services, one-on-one services should not be handled by the public sector. When you're going to a company, visiting them, and being able to find out what their demands are and how can you help them, that should then be turned over to the experts. Thank you.
I'm going to take 2 more questions from the floor, and then I'm going to take the privilege of moderator and adding one of my own. So, gentleman over there, and then the lady in the green scarf. Please.
My name is Philippe Lucio from the Global Framework for Climate Services, World Meteorological Organization. I just couldn't resist reacting to the last question. And I wanted to go back to the opening statement about the doctors. And you'll see that where you have more doctors assisting families, the quality of healthcare is much better. Where you have 1 doctor per 1,000 patients, the quality is going to be compromised. And I would say the same with respect to the road we are trying to embark on. There's certainly a great role being played, and for climate services, we should recognize the role that meteorological services have played. We are building on the legacy, we are building on the technology, we are building on the networks which were put in place by the meteorological services. But they're very often public entities, and there are strains on public services. You cannot enlarge your employees. So how do you make sure that you reach out to those different patients who need support? So certainly there's a space for engaging other entities, engaging other purveyors, as it was put across. But I think what is critical is understanding where, as it was said, the public ends and where the private starts, and what are the roles between the different players. And I think the fact that we're going to have a framework that is going to, in a sense, enable a market, we should use that framework to kind of start defining, not boundaries perhaps, but understanding better who does what under which circumstances.
Our doctor analogy is going to get complex. We're going to start having hospitals and doctors on the ground in different communities, and please.
My name is Jette Besseminner. I'm from the Met Office in the Netherlands. I would like to react to your answer to the question, which I found a little bit contradictory to my own experiences. You said that a task of the public organizations could be finding out what is the demand, and that one-to-one projects should be more for the market. But if I look at my own experience, I see that when I'm working together with people, really in projects, when I have a longer engagement with them, then I really find out what they really need, what are their demands. And I think that was also illustrated very well by the example of Monica Barr. You had a long time relation, and then only after the 3rd project, you came to the real question, the real demand. And I think that but it makes it a little bit complicated. I certainly see a role for the market and I see a role for the public, but it's not as clear as you indicated, I think.
I'll react to your reaction. I don't disagree with you. However, again, I'm going to play on personal experience as you did. when I say I, as a public authority, not technically a public authority, but public entity, engaging with the local community to find out what the needs are and demands are, absolutely you have to get to know them. You have to, and that takes time. It doesn't happen in one workshop or one networking session. It takes time, but that's why the importance of people in the field at a regional, local level are so key. However, if I'm going to find out the demands, I simply cannot dedicate enough time to carry out, for example, a proper life cycle analysis. I'm an environmental professional, I could, but I couldn't dedicate that time. I don't have the funds or the time to do that for all my companies. Hence why, I mean, I think this is also about boosting the green economy, and part of the boost economy is selling climate services for environmental professionals. I think that we can't deny that to environmental professionals. And I do think there is a clear time when they should take over. And that's when SMEs also are forced to make important decisions of how much of their investment do they want to dedicate to this. And I think that's my role, to push them to do that. Say, yes, this is a good step for you. And help them, perhaps even help them identify so that they, good climate service providers, so that they have a reason to reduce the risk they think they're taking and their uncertainty. And I have done that before. I have created a platform where I've connected climate service providers to climate service users, and without necessarily, sticking a gold star on this climate service is the one you should use, but enabling the engagement between the two and not putting climate service providers that I wouldn't back or that I wouldn't choose on the list. Does that make sense?
All the members of the panel have been invited here today because the work you have done is ahead of the work of others in your sector. You're in the lead. And although markets need feedback to grow, they also, of course, grow through peer group perception, peer group pressure. So if I were to put you on the spot and ask you to do a bit of marketing for the concept of climate services, I'd ask you, what would you say to your peer, your competitor in your own sector who is not yet thinking to the extent that you are about why they may need to do that? What's your, as it were, health advice about them seeking the medical advice? And I'm going to put Tanya on the spot for this too, because I'd like the agricultural voice. Paul, can we start at your end of the table?
I spend my time communicating this to businesses, and I would say really there'll be winners and losers from a transition to a low carbon economy. There will be winners and losers from changes in the physical climate. And by utilising climate services, you will be a winner. You will be a more resilient business. You'll be a low carbon business. Everybody will love your brand more. And that's why you should buy climate services today.
I think if you use climate services, you can minimize your risk to climate change. If you have options to adapt in time, and we have time until climate change really starts after 2050.
So how to be a winner, how not to be a loser, yes? Carlo.
Well, use climate services because the world is changing, and by using it, when your competitors will be asking to himself what is happening, you will have the solution.
Well, climate change is a business imperative, and to make good decisions, you need to have reliable information, and I think that's where it's all about. And it's not about private or public. I think we need each other to really bring this together, align with business needs.
Well, what I would just say is that we are facing a period of complex changes, and climate change is only one part of it. And so we need tools and elements to face and to adapt to these changes. And climate services is one of these important tools.
Okay, in my experience, I think I don't straight off say all the cool people are doing it, but I do insist on resource efficiency. In fact, and I think someone else said this, but at risk of putting myself out of a job, I'm starting to think that environment is dead. to throw something out there. This is about innovation. This is about business sense. This is about logic. And when you look at the cost of raw materials, it's only going up. So if you want to survive, if you want to be a player, you got to join the bandwagon.
Yes. When it comes to agriculture, sometimes the pressures are so high that it's difficult to look ahead the next 2 years. So a good example is the wine sector, where we are losing some of our very valuable wines. And when I explain this with the wine, then everybody understands, oh yes, that is good. But where are we moving? And then to find the right consultant and the right person who can give the right indications, then it starts difficult. But the best way of marketing is align it with your investment. This works. And this is really the discussion that we have, and to choose the same time frames in the policy so that allow the right investments. And this, I think this is a common work that we need to do, and there everybody understands in that language.
I think if I were to pull all those comments together into one, it's to say that it's clear that the future will not look like the past, and that information about climate change is going to be a crucial factor for getting on top of that challenge. And that's the challenge we're going to throw to the next panel after the lunch break.